Alright, we're back with more causes of the American Revolution. Today, instead of looking at the final 7, we're going to look just at the next 4. We stress the idea of hands-off going to hands-on, that idea of British allowing lots of freedom to the American colonists and then suddenly deciding they wanted to get all up in the colonist business. Today, we're going to continue that trend when things are going to get more serious. So let's look at the next 4 causes of the American Revolution. Cause number 8 of the American Revolution is the Boston Massacre. By 1770, things had gotten tense in the American colonies. They were so tired of the idea of hands-on that they had begun all the protests that we mentioned earlier. They're harassing tax collectors. They're throwing out the property of loyalists, sometimes destroying their homes. The British are tired of this. They send thousands of soldiers to Massachusetts, especially the port city of Boston. The idea, their mere presence, will bring peace to the city and put down the protest. The exact opposite is going to happen. Bostonians look at the soldiers not as protectors or bringers of peace, but as a threat. What that means is every single day, Bostonians, urged on by members of the Sons of Liberty, harass British soldiers. They call them names, they spit on them, they tell them to go home. This all comes to head on March 5th, 1770. It had been a snowy day and now a snowy night. It was cold, and we have once again a group of Bostonians harassing some British soldiers. The British soldiers had been ordered to stand their ground, but to not fire. The Bostonians continue to hurl insults. The problem is they begin to hurl other things: snowballs, sticks, stones. When one of the British soldiers is hit, he disobeys instructions and fires his musket. The other soldiers follow suit. By the end of the night, there are 5 dead colonists and 1 very angry city. Boston is now going to be enraged. Even those who had been on the fence as to whether or not they would support the Sons of Liberty are now angry, and the soldiers are going to be put on trial. What is expected to be a very quick trial, however, turns. For as the evidence comes forward and witnesses step forward, it becomes obvious that the soldiers were firing in self-defense. We don't hear much about that because the Sons of Liberty are not going to put that message out. The Sons of Liberty are going to work very hard to push the idea of 5 colonists being killed in a massacre. Hence the word, the Boston Massacre. In class, we're actually going to be looking at the popular engraving that was used as propaganda to convince other colonists to join the Sons of Liberty cause. Before we go on to any more causes, I think it's important that we recognize somebody that was at the trial of the Boston Massacre, and that is John Adams. John Adams' cousin was actually Sam Adams. Sam Adams was a member of the Sons of Liberty. He was one of the organizers, one of the leaders. John Adams was not so quickly part of the protesters, part of the patriotic movement. Instead, he was seeking reconciliation with the British. Not so much because he was a loyalist, but just because he felt that was the right thing to do. And that's what I like about John Adams. As John Adams begins to get the patriotic fever himself, he recognizes that it is important how the Americans look, not only to each other, not only to Britain, but to the rest of the world. That is why John Adams, the future president of the United States, actually is the lawyer for the British soldiers at the so-called Boston Massacre. Why? He believes that everyone should have the right to a fair trial. Everyone should have the right to legal counsel, good legal counsel. And it is John Adams that is credited with getting the soldiers acquitted. It's an interesting story and side note to the idea of the American Revolution, when you have Sam Adams on one side pushing towards people to bother and harass the British soldiers, and you have John Adams on the other defending them in court. In truth, Sam Adams understood what was going on there. Sam Adams was pushing Bostonians to harass soldiers. At the same time, he understood that it was important to give off a good picture. Cause number 9 of the American Revolution is the Tea Act of 1773, in parentheses, the Boston Tea Party. This was a law that actually lowered the price of tea in the colonies. The controlling part, however, was that the law required that all Americans bought their tea from one company, the British East India Tea Company. Now, the problem with that is many members of Parliament actually owned a stake in that company, and they were losing money. They thought they could make their money back by selling it to Americans. Americans aren't fooled. Americans once again see this as control. Yes, the price of tea might go down, but they are being told what to do. And we Americans, all the way back from the original colony times, do not like to be told what to do. This is another attempt at control. The difficult part is tea in the colonies at the time, as it was in the entire British Empire, is much like Coca-Cola in the United States today. We have to have it, and we have to have it often. So protesting the Tea Act was going to be difficult for the Sons of Liberty, but they pull it off. They convince Americans to not buy tea from the British East India Company, but instead to continue to buy tea that is being smuggled in through other routes. It helps that some of the Sons of Liberty are some of the more prominent shippers in all of the colonies. In Boston, the Sons of Liberty are very successful at preventing tea from even being offloaded from ships, where the tax would then be immediately due. In November of 1773, 3 ships enter the harbor. They're loaded down with tea. The Sons of Liberty prevent any of that tea from being loaded. When word gets out that the ships are going to be returning back with the tea still in place in the cargo of the ships, the Sons of Liberty decide to act. 50 young members of the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves, kind of, as Mohawk Indians. Everyone knew who they were. And on that December 16th, they're going to kind of run down to the ships, walk up to the captain, and politely ask for the keys to the cargo holds. Over the next 3 hours, they dump 342 boxes of tea into the Boston harbor. The keys are handed back, nothing else is harmed on the ships, and the Sons of Liberty leave. Great Britain is going to be angry. It's obvious what the Sons of Liberty are doing here. They're protesting. The British are going to see this, and they are going to react. Their reaction is going to be cause number 10. Cause number 10 of the American Revolution is a series of laws known as the Coercive or Intolerable Acts. What you called them depended on which side you were on. The British referred to these series of laws as coercive because they were meant to force the colonists into obeying the crown. Colonists, especially the Sons of Liberty, are going to call them intolerable. Intolerable means too harsh, too much to bear. There were actually 5 laws as part of the Coercive Intolerable Acts. The first one stated that any loyalist, anyone that still believed in the king and the government of Great Britain, if he or she is accused of a crime, their trial will actually be held in Great Britain. Now that's significant because that meant someone who was loyal to the king kind of had freedom to do what they wanted in Massachusetts or Boston without any real fear of reprisal, because there's nothing the colonists could do in trial. In many ways, this was to allow the loyalists to begin harassing colonists. Another law took disputed pieces of land in western Massachusetts and north of Massachusetts and actually gave the land to Canada. Great Britain said, we're not going to allow the land to be disputed anymore, we're taking it from you. It's the last 3 parts of the Coercive Intolerable Act that inflicts really the most pain on the colonists. The first one is a new quartering act. If you recall, we already talked about a quartering act. Quarters means a place where someone lives, and we had talked about British soldiers needing a place to live. Previously, quartering acts meant that the colonists had to provide for a soldier, provide for the army when they came. With the Intolerable Acts, there's a new quartering act. This time, the soldiers are allowed to take what they want. If they need a piece of property, they do not have to ask for provision, but instead seize the property as they saw fit. The next coercive act that was inflicted a great deal of pain is Boston Harbor is going to be permanently closed down until the tea is paid for. Well, the Sons of Liberty are going to make sure that the tea is not paid for. And so Boston Harbor is going to close down. It'll be surrounded by British ships with British soldiers running the docks. That essentially closes all of Boston down. That was their lifeblood. As we talked about when we went through the colonies, all of the New England colonies live by the ocean. And not by in location, but by in the ocean drove their lives. Now the harbor is going to close and Boston people are going to suffer. The last part of the course of Intolerable Acts was that Massachusetts was no longer going to have self-rule. They were essentially going to become a royal colony. The British Army was taking over the government of Massachusetts. They no longer had a say. It was essentially Parliament saying, we understand you don't like us being going from hands off to hands on, and you talk about it in generalities, we're actually going to do it. We're going to straight out tell you, you have lost self-rule, we are going to meddle in your business. The Sons of Liberty call these 5 laws the perfect crisis. The perfect crisis. What I would like, rather than have me explain that to you, is if you can tell me what the perfect crisis means, I would like to offer you an incentive. Go back to my blog where you found the link to this video, and in the comment section underneath, you tell me, what do the Sons of Liberty mean when they see this Boston being closed down? When they see the people of Boston beginning to suffer? Why do they call that the perfect crisis? Perfect seems to imply something good. Maybe they're right. The 11th cause of the American Revolution, or at least the 11th step, is the holding of the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, in the colony of Pennsylvania. The colonies decided that because of what was happening in Boston with the coercive Intolerable Acts, that they need to act, but they need to act together. So they decide to have a meeting. 12 of the 13 colonies are going to gather to discuss the situation. Now I said 12. Georgia is not going to be there. Depending on which source you believe, there's 2 possible reasons why Georgia is not there. They are the colony that's the furthest away. But there is also some theories that Georgia was a little bit hesitant of joining. Those of you who'd studied Georgia for the last test know why. Georgia was a royal colony, run by a great number of loyalists. Either way, it's just important to note, Georgia's not there at the beginning. They will be by the time we get to number 14. The colonists at this First Continental Congress agree to work together. What does that mean? They're going to boycott all British goods. No longer is it just things with stamps on it, or just tea, or things like sugar. They agree to boycott all British goods. They want the British people, the British businessmen, to understand what's going on in the American colonies. They agree to send food and other provisions to Massachusetts. They're going to have to do so by land, and they're going to have to work together to make that happen. With Boston Harbor closed, that meant people were starting to run out of supplies, especially food. The other colonies agree, we're going to help. The last thing that they ask all the colonies to do is to begin to strengthen their militias. We've talked in class about what a militia is, this idea of a volunteer army meant to defend the colonies. Well, they've been used here and there, especially against groups of Native Americans. But there's a realization now that they're going to have to be much stronger, that the volunteer soldiers are going to have to be much better prepared. The First Continental Congress tells the colonies, get your men ready. We're no longer in just a tense situation. At the end of our last discussion of causes with the first 7, we said an errant shot might cause a problem. We're way past an errant shot. We now have 2 hostile sides arming themselves. The question is, who are the 2 sides? On one side you have Americans, an entirely volunteer militia. They're bankers, they're farmers, they're shoemakers. On the weekends they practice with their muskets. Who are they going against? They're going against essentially the biggest, baddest army and navy in the world. They were conquering land all over the world. And these colonists feel they have a chance. In truth, the British Army and Navy looked at them and in many ways chuckled. They're the biggest, baddest army and navy in the world. And these are some mere colonists. They're about to be surprised.